What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Case Digital. My name is Zach, and in this video we're going to answer the question, what does Boolean mean in Python? So without further ado, let's hop right in and start coding. This video, like I mentioned, we're answering that question, what does Boolean mean in Python? So first off, I wanted to kind of share kind of the Boolean, or what the definition is of Boolean. And so it's a computer science term, so if I kind of just went over and I Googled this. And essentially, you get the definition. It basically means denoting a system of algebraic notation used to represent logical propositions, especially in computing and electronics. A binary variable having two possible values called true and false. So essentially, like it says over here, in computer science, Boolean is a data type. So like I mentioned before, in previous videos, you have data types such as float, int, strings in Python. Well, I mean, those are all kind of in other programming languages as well. But now we are talking about the data type of Boolean, or also in other words known as a bool. This data type, basically, like it mentions here, has one of two possible values, which is intended to represent the two truth values of logic and Boolean algebra. So what does this mean in Python? So essentially, like it said, a Boolean has two values. It can either be true or false. In computer terms, that can mean, or I guess in binary terms, that can be basically 1 or 0. And essentially, in Python, I can have a true bool. This is my true bool variable, and it'll equal true. Now the syntax for true or false in Python is true with a capital T, or we can have the false version, which is false. So essentially, if I print these out, true bool, you'll see that we get true and false. So, okay, that just shows it's true and false. So what can we do with this? Well, essentially, like you mentioned, these are a lot of times used for conditional statements or some logical statement that you're trying to solve. So for instance, you could do something like 5 greater than 2. If we print this out, you'll see that we get a true statement here. I mean, you can chain a lot of the logical operators. So a lot of these logical operators are going to be things such as greater than, less than, equal to, not equal to. You can do stuff like and that can be used to chain things. So like 5 is greater than 2, and 3 is less than 5. So we print that out. You can see that that whole statement evaluates to true. So essentially, a Boolean, a logical statement in your code that a lot of times it's used for like control flow. So what I mean by that is used in things such as if-else statements, for loops, while loops, any loop really, any kind of thing that you want to say, like if it's this case, then do this piece of code. If it's the next case, then do the other piece of code. Essentially, that's where the Boolean data type, or bools, come in handy a lot. Essentially, that's basically what a bool is. It's basically something that just tells you what the logical answer is for a given statement. These statements can be huge. I mean, you can do something like 55 is not equal to, you can do something like 55 is not equal to 64, and 32 is less than 55, or you can do or statements. So these are the logical. This is how you write a logical or. Or you have to say 33 is less than or equal to 55. So if we run that, that's going to evaluate to true because all this statement's true, this statement's true, and this statement's true. Now you can also use these with variables. So for instance, if I have a variable like my num is equal to 32, and actually if I just move this up, I can say my num, if I run this, this should still equal to true. So essentially, you can just do that with all these variables, and it can help you go into, which we'll do in the next video, where we'll talk about something where you can create if statements, where like if my num is less than 5, then print this string of yay, else print boo. You can do stuff like this, and it doesn't have to be just numbers, right? I can do things such as, let's say name equals to Jim, name 2 is equal to Chase, and I can say something like is name equal to name 2. And we can print this out, and you'll see that name is equal to name 2. Well, that's false, and so that evaluates to false, so then it's going to jump down to here and run this piece of code. And so we'll get more into this in the next video, but for right now, I just want to show this is what a Boolean is. A Boolean, or otherwise known as a bool, is just another data type in Python that essentially evaluates a logical expression. Usually it's used for control flow, like we mentioned here, to run one piece of code over another. A lot of times that's what it's used for. I mean, that's what I use a lot for my day-to-day programming activities. I mean, there are other use cases for it, but essentially that's what we use for it. And it only has 2 values. It's either true or false. And now you can do all the other logical operators. You can use all the other logical operators to evaluate something, like, with numbers like greater than or equal to, not equal to. There's some other operators that you can do in Python that we can get into a little bit here in the next video when we talk about this control flow stuff. But for the most part, that's what a Boolean operator is. So without further ado, go try this. Go make some logical operators. Maybe go crack open an old math textbook. I know, you don't want to do math, but just go crack one open. Code up a little problem that's a Boolean logic, Boolean statement, and just see what it does. And without further ado, hop right in, start coding.